reading today in our Old Testament Bible accurately reflect what was originally written by the Old Testament authors? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. By the way, guys, my name is Daniel Wilson. Welcome to Faith and Fit. I'm a Christian, lived with an atheist for a year, had no idea how to defend my faith, and I don't want you to be one of those Christians. Let's get into it. So when examining the evidence for the Old Testament and to basically suss out if what we're reading today accurately reflects what was originally written down, we're going to refer to what is called the Hebrew sources. Now, when it comes to the Hebrew sources, you have a couple of different varieties. So you have what's called the Masoretic Text, you have the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Nash Papyrus, and the Silver Amulets. But for today's discussion, we're just going to talk about the Masoretic Text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. A majority of the English translations of the Old Testament are derived from the ancient text called the Masoretes. And the Masoretes are a group of Jewish scholars from the 8th century CE or Common Era onward who maintained ancient traditions and developed new ones for copying the biblical text. Now, a term for an individual that copies the biblical text is called a scribe. So basically, the Masoretes are a group of scribes, group of Jewish scribes. And in case you don't know, a scribe is an early scholar who maintained the tradition, and it wasn't just a hobby for them, it was an actual profession. They took it very, very serious. A couple of notes I took about scribes were they had to be a male of good standing. A scribe must wash himself entirely and be in full Jewish dress before beginning to copy the scroll. He could not write the name Yahweh with a newly dipped brush, nor take notice of anyone, even a king, while writing the sacred name. And the temple would also employ these individuals called correctors, who would basically go in behind the scribe and make sure that what the scribe was writing down was accurate, basically correcting their work. That just goes to show the next level that they were willing to go to make sure that what is being written down is being accurately preserved. To the Masoretic Text, historians divided up into 3 periods. So the first period is with the Masoretic Text. It originated among the Babylonian Jews or the Pharisees, and it ended with the destruction of the temple in 70 CE or sometime in and around that period. And then that brings us to the second period, which extends from the destruction of the temple in 70 CE to about the 8th century. And by this time, we start to get some textual unity within the documents. It's not just a piece here, a piece there. And then by the time we get into the third period, it can be characterized by a complete cohesive message as far as the Old Testament is really starting to come together. It's really starting to form one book. And that's from about the 8th century into the Middle Ages. And scholars usually consider this third period to be the most authoritative Masoretic text of the manuscripts. And that's about AD 800 to the 12th century. And if you wanted to actually read some books from this third period, they would be called codex or codices. And a codice is a manuscript that is in book form with pages. And I took a couple of notable codexes that we can actually read, we can look at in our possession. You have the Aleppo Codex, which is the earliest complete form of the Bible until a later discovery, but it's considered the most authoritative manuscript, and the manuscript has actually been used as the basis for the Hebrew Bible Project in Jerusalem. Another notable codex is the Codex Kyrense, which is written in AD 895, and we know that date because of this thing called a colophon. A colophon is an inscription at the end of the book that gives info concerning the scribe, the name, the date, the place of the manuscript's production. And in this Codex Kyrense contains the books Joshua, Judges 1 and 2, Samuel, Kings, the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and some of the minor prophets. And this next one I actually found interesting. It's called the Geniza manuscripts. So in the 1860s, you had this Geniza, which is a small storage room of a synagogue. And just lying around in this small storage room was over 250,000 Jewish manuscript fragments. Somebody just happened to find, I guess. But 15% of those manuscript fragments are biblical text written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, and they range in date from the 6th century AD to as late as the 1800s. Now, what makes the Masoretic Text significant is because it provided the only textual witness, and when I say textual witness, I mean books that we can look back on to make sure that what we're reading today actually reflects what was written back then. So it provided the only textual witness to the Old Testament for more than 1,000 years. So basically, what the manuscripts that we have available today provides evidence that what was written 1,000 years ago has been accurately recorded, right? So now, obviously, you might be thinking, well, that's a 1,000-year time gap. How do we know, as it's being transmissioned throughout the ages, it wasn't changed? And that's a valid question, and that's a question that historians have often asked. And the answer to that question would be answered in 1947, 8 years later. So in 1947, you have these Bedouin shepherds. Bedouin shepherds are animal herders who migrate with their herds across the desert and cultivated lands based on the seasons. So they found themselves about a mile inland from the Dead Sea near the ancient site called Qumran. And what happened is one of their goats went missing. And so obviously one of the shepherds wanted to go look for the goat. And as they're searching, they came across this cave. And they thought the goat might be in the cave, might not. They didn't really want to just walk in there because it could be dangerous. Who knows what kind of animal may be in there. So what one of the shepherds did was actually picked up this pebble, true story, picked up this pebble, tossed it in there to see if they could hear anything, maybe, drive the goat out, or, maybe there's nothing. But what they did hear was glass breaking. And so obviously this piqued their interest. They decided to investigate further, and what they initially found was a collection of large clay jars that were carefully sealed and well preserved. And in 7 of the clay jars contained leather and papyrus scrolls. Leather and papyrus is what ancient scribes would use as writing materials. Leather usually would last a lot longer. It was a lot more durable, but papyrus wasn't very durable. It was known to disintegrate over time, but due to the dry and arid climate that they found themselves in, that papyrus has actually been well preserved. Now, shepherds, they didn't really understand what they had. They didn't think what they had was of any significant value. So they keep it, they go about their day, they find their goat. Later that night back at camp, one of their cousins suggests, hey, those scrolls might be worth some value. You should go and check it out. And so they take their cousin's advice, and they went to this first dealer who basically said that the scribes were worthless, who basically said the manuscripts were worthless and that they were probably stolen from some synagogue. You should probably go and put them back. The second dealer that they went to, who was a local antiquities dealer in Bethlehem named Kondo, bought them for 7 Jordanian pounds, and that would equal about $28. And if it was today, it would be $380. And then Kondo turned around and then sold them to the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop Samuel of Jerusalem. Eventually, the scrolls would catch the attention of archaeologists who would then go and have a second look at the caves, what is now known as Cave 1, and what they found is considered one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. By 1956, a total of 11 caves had been discovered at Qumran, and over 1,000 scrolls were found in the Qumran caves, and about 25,000 to 50,000 pieces, all of which were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, and roughly 300 of those manuscripts are classified as biblical texts and can be considered our earliest witness to the biblical text. Now call them the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the earliest Dead Sea Scrolls are considered super ancient. The earliest ones we found at the Qumran site date back to about 250 BCE or a little earlier. So that's over 2,000 years old and over 1,000 years older than the most authoritative Masoretic manuscript that we have, the the Aleppo Codex that's dated to about 925. So needless to say, the answer to that question, has it been transmission accurately throughout the years? This is very good evidence that the answer to that question is yes. They actually match up pretty well, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic Text. Now, to do a deep dive into what was found in those 11 caves. So, one, you actually have the Great Isaiah Scroll, and then fragments of other biblical works. But what makes the find in this cave so significant is the Great Isaiah Scroll has actually been very well preserved. Like I said, normally we find fragments of biblical works, but in this case, we actually found like a whole entire scroll that has been completely preserved. Moving on, so cave 2, we have fragments of Genesis through Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Psalms, Job, Ruth. Cave 3, we have fragments of Ezekiel, Psalms, Lamentations. Cave 4, which is actually rivaling Cave 1 as far as the impactfulness. So you have 20,000 fragments representing more than 700 scrolls. Cave 5 through 10, more fragments of Deuteronomy, Kings, Isaiah, Amos, Psalms, Lamentations, Genesis, and Exodus. Cave 11, fragments of 31 scrolls, including the Psalm scroll. So needless to say, this is a very important find. Not only did this give us insight to the historical accuracy of the Old Testament, but it also gave us more insight into the New Testament. There's a lot that we could say about this, and we probably will say about this at a later date. But for now, we do have a lot of evidence that the Old Testament that we're reading today has been transmissioned accurately and has been well preserved throughout the ages, right? Until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we had the Nash Papyrus, which was discovered in 1902, and this was the earliest textual witness until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Hebrew Bible, and it was dated between the 2nd and 1st century. It contained the 10 Commandments and other parts of Exodus and Deuteronomy. So that's it for today. Again, my name is Daniel Wilson. Welcome to Faith and Fit. Like the video, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next week.